My name is Lindsey Ellis. I'm from Kenton, Ohio. I grew up small town, farm life, rural area. My parents were divorced. I had a drug-addicted father who was not extremely present and an alcoholic mother who was physically present but not emotionally. So I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. My grandma helped raise me. My childhood was not the worst. I can't complain about a lot of things. I had all of my needs met as far as shelter, clothing, food, everything a child would need. There was not a lot of emotional support. There was a lot of animosity between my mother and father, and so she put me in the middle of their divorce quite a bit. I spent a lot of my childhood battling, feeling guilty about loving my father because my mom wanted me to hate my father, essentially, which definitely messed up my perspective of the family home life and how things are supposed to be growing up. I was raised in church, Methodist, where you sit quiet as the church mouse, and I got away from it after time because it was all about the image to my family. It was, you go to church, it's what you're supposed to do. Community farm, conservative farm people who had to hold up this whole image in society. And so when I wasn't abiding by that image, I was shunned. So I got away from it because it seemed very hypocritical to me. My family was full of judgment, full of shaming, and I didn't see truth in it. I just saw that it was what society says you're supposed to do, so that's what people do. So growing up, I had a very broken home where my parents were divorced, like I said. So I have 4 older siblings. One was adopted by my father, so 3 biological. My brother's full-blooded. My brother Shane, he's 2 years older than me. I have 2 sisters who are 7 and 8 years older than me with the same dad and a different mom. And then my mom remarried, and I have a little brother who's 6 years younger than me with a different father, but a same mom. As far as church, neither one of my parents went to church. Neither one of them had any kind of religious role in my family. My grandma was the staple of my religious life growing up. She took me to church every Sunday, every Wednesday. I did youth group. I did church camp every summer, Bible school every summer. I became an aide and a counselor the older I got. And she taught me a lot of good morals and values, and I very much appreciate my grandma for being that role model in my life. So when I steered away from Jesus, it hurt her quite a bit. And she's probably the only person in my family and the only mentor I had that actually walked it out the way it was supposed to be. Growing up in a broken home with my parents being divorced caused quite a bit of childhood trauma. And then my father passed away from drug addiction when I was 18. I had 4 older siblings. All of them did not graduate high school. I was the only one to graduate, and he passed a week before my graduation. That was hard. That was really hard to deal with at such a young age. I was always a daddy's girl. I always felt more connected and closer to my father than I did my mother. I felt abandoned, and I turned to drugs. And I was a closet heroin user for a good 13, 14 years. I always told myself I walked a fine line of having it together and not, because nobody knew. I was very good at keeping it hidden at all of my jobs, but eventually, when I hit about early 30s, I don't know exactly how old I was, but it was like 32, 31, 32, somewhere around in there. I finally got arrested and charged with possession of cocaine and possession of heroin. Throughout all of that, I missed my court date. I started to unravel. I didn't know that I had a warrant. I went to jail. I made friends in jail, which is a terrible idea. Don't ever do that. But that's where I met Mike, and I only knew him for about a month and a half. And in my drug addiction, I made some poor choices and poor judgment calls, and I'm not going to sit here and play victim because I allowed that into my life. However, like I said, I always thought I had it together by walking that fine line. He definitely slingshot me way past that line, somewhere I never would have gone alone, I don't think, in order to control me. And he told me that several times, that it was a control thing, and that he didn't want me to be sober because he was afraid I wouldn't like him. Even being a heroin user for 13 years, I never got to the point where I overdosed. I never had to be Narcaned. As soon as I met him, I ended up in the back of a squad car and had to be Narcaned 4 separate occasions in a matter of a month. I told him one day, I'm strung out and I don't want to be by myself, but I don't like you. And his exact words were, you love me. I can see it in your eyes. So that just paints a picture of the kind of person he was. He had some serious psychological issues and walked with a lot of demons. And it was the first time in my entire life where I genuinely tried to commit suicide by overdosing as soon as I found out I was pregnant. When I first met him, I met a girl in jail, and she introduced me to him. And in trying to keep myself on that fine line, I made it a point. I lived an hour away from home. So instead of getting drugs where I lived, I would drive an hour away from home, and he was more convenient. So it became a convenient, closer connection, an easier way for me to get high than driving so far. So that's how we met. And it was like once he came to my house, I couldn't get him to leave. He had a warrant. He was hiding from the cops. And I don't know if it was a justification or what, but I felt bad kicking him out on the street with nowhere to go with a warrant. And at the time, looking back, that was a terrible choice. But in the moment, that's where I felt bad. Like I felt guilty. I've always been a people pleaser. And so I just felt like I couldn't do that to somebody, no matter how much damage they were causing in my own life. I couldn't cause that kind of damage in someone else's. Didn't matter how they treated me. He found out about the pregnancy over the phone because after he got arrested, I did still communicate with him for a very short period of time, and I accidentally let it slip. It wasn't even something I was going to say out loud, and I caught myself afterwards, and I was like, oh no. And he was like, wait, did you just say you were pregnant? I said, yes. And he said, you're probably going to abort it anyways. But looking back on the whole situation and everything that he said to me while we were using, it was intentional to control me or to keep me in his life in some way. I would black out and I would wake up to him raping me on several occasions. And at the time, I didn't really know what was happening because I was so out of my mind on drugs that he would convince me that it was just the drugs. It's just the drugs. You're just high. That's all it is. And so I thought it was me. I thought it was in my head. I thought that I was crazy. But once I started to sober up and realize like what was truly happening, and I could look back and see with a sober mind all the pieces where I should have been like, whoa, it was easy for me to put together that it was completely intentional. So after he found out, and to be honest, I wasn't even 100% sure it was him that got me pregnant because I did sleep with one other person one time. He wanted me to keep it because for him, that was the way into our life. That was a way to keep me. That was a way to control me. It was domestic abuse and control from a narcissist to the fullest. Nothing about it was about my son. Not one thing about it was about wanting to be a father. It was simply him wanting that power over me. He just assumed, because I have had 2 abortions in the past, that I was just going to abort him. And to be completely honest, I really considered it because I had 2 abortions already. What's another one? And that's where my mind was at with it. And growing up in a religious family, I was afraid to tell my family about the first 2 because I didn't want them to talk me out of having an abortion. When I was about, I think around 27, I moved to Columbus. I'd already been in Columbus, but I moved to Columbus and I met this man that I started dating. It's really the only time I've had any serious long-term relationship in my life. We started dating, and probably not even a year into our relationship, I got pregnant. And at the time, like, I was doing well financially for myself. I was doing well as far as drug addiction went. I hadn't been using. I'd been clean for almost 9 months. And I thought I had found this perfect man. And I thought, this is it. This is my life. Like, we weren't married yet. I was ready to be a mother. He had other thoughts. His spiral in the whole thing and the way he treated me when I just wanted to sit down and discuss how we're going to move forward. This is what it is. How are we moving forward? Where are we going from here? The way he treated me every time I would cry, and the way he treated me when I said I wanted to keep it, and like how ugly he got, hurt a lot. Also financially, like I need him to step up to the plate, because at the particular moment I'm the breadwinner and I don't want to do everything on my own. He was a big karaoke fan, and so he would do competitions, and I remember one night he won a karaoke contest and won like $300. So I'm thinking, yes, we can put that towards our future or whatever we're doing here. He blew the entire $300 buying the entire bar shot. So that was a wake-up call. Maybe this is a terrible idea. If that's how he's going to handle this, imagine how he's going to handle anything else down the road if we have a child together. So I was very convicted about having an abortion at the time. And I was obviously not walking with Jesus at the time, but I was very convicted that the way he treated me, I was like, this is ugly. I don't want to deal with this. So I had an abortion and stayed with him for 4 more years. But he started drinking heavier, became very narcissistic. He was already narcissistic. I just didn't see it. But it got thick towards the end, very thin. And he started lashing out at me over this abortion and how you aborted our child. And then after that didn't work on me, he started reversing it. Like, it's my fault. I killed our child. Had I not treated you the way I did, we never would have had an abortion. And it became a thing. And I used to tell him, like, you don't get to do that. You don't get to twist something that I have no regrets over and I feel confident in and guilt trip me over it after the way you treated me. And after about 5 years of dealing with mental abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, I left. And it did send me into another spiral with alcohol, drugs, sex. I didn't really date anybody after that, but I was seeking some kind of comfort, so I slept with everybody. It became very casual to me. It was not uncommon for me to have friends that were guys that I hung out with on a regular basis, that was our thing. And that became my normal. Still heavy into the heroin use. And around this time, I picked up using methamphetamines and everything else under the sun. Things began to get a lot worse. And then I started to reel back in and try and put the pieces back together after a broken relationship. So a few years after we split up, I started hanging out with a guy that I coached gymnastics with, and we would drink, and that was it. And I thought that was okay. As long as I'm just drinking and smoking weed, that's socially acceptable by society, that's okay. Alcohol is probably one of my biggest downfalls, because I think I can drink and then make great decisions, and that's never the case. I started drinking with this guy pretty heavily. We started casually sleeping together. He packs up and moves back to Hawaii with his girlfriend that he's had this entire time, while also still working through his divorce with his wife. So that kind of messed with me mentally a little bit. I knew about it from the get-go. He never hid it. He never was shy about it. In the state of mind I was in, I didn't care. I didn't care that I was a homewrecker. I didn't care that his teenage daughter was completely against it. She, 13 years old, even told him, Dad, you can't have a wife, a girlfriend, and a mistress. And I was the mistress. And I didn't care. I had no self-respect. So the first abortion, after him not being very supportive about anything, it's been a long time now. I can't always remember all the details about it, but we had to borrow money from his brother to pay for it. I do remember that. I remember he dropped me off because he had to work. Wasn't there for any of it. Picked me up way later than I needed to be picked up. I was supposed to leave sooner. I had to sit there and wait on him to come get me. And the only really vivid part I remember was getting in the car, being extremely emotional about it, and still in a lot of pain, obviously, and just breaking down and saying, don't ever make me go through that again. The following week was also hard. I worked in an environment that was very pro-life. And although they were supportive of the decision that I made, I still felt guilty because I knew where their opinions stood. So mentally, I thought this was going to be some beautiful, happy, I finally found my soulmate and we're having a child together. And so it was crushing to discover that that it wasn't this happily ever after that I thought it was. And why I stayed for 4 more years is something I still ask myself. So then I go on to meet this other guy. And after drinking and no self-respect, I get knocked. He moved back to Hawaii and I get knocked up. And at the time, I truly felt like I loved this man. And he felt like he loved me too. Even though he had a girlfriend, he would still call me every time he had a bad day. Even in Hawaii, every time he came home to visit, he would hang out with me. And that's how I ended up pregnant. I called him and told him about it. And he, in all honesty, he told me, given the circumstances, he has a wife that he's still not divorced from, a girlfriend in Hawaii, and I'm just the mistress. He said, given the circumstances, I'm not sure if it's the healthiest environment to raise a child in, but I will support you in whatever you decide. And he did. Being in Hawaii, he wasn't able to be there, but he called and checked on me. He was a lot more supportive than the man who was in my life on a daily basis. He felt guilty about it. He paid for it 100%. He called to make sure I was okay emotionally through every moment of it. The next time he came to Ohio, he spent every waking minute with me and just kept telling me, I'm sorry. Not once did he pressure me into any of it. He told me he would fully support 100% whatever I decided, which was freeing to be able to make that decision after the last abortion. I felt so pressured. And so I decided that it wasn't an environment I wanted to raise a child in. Because growing up Christian, I had all these moral values that I wanted to do it the right way, and still not there. I decided to make the call to have an abortion. So I found a place in Dayton, and I went with a very close friend of mine who also happened to be a man, but somebody that I had been friends with for a good 11 years. He lived close by, so he took me, he dropped me off, he picked me up, and he was a very good friend through the whole thing, but I still felt like I went through it alone. Even with the phone calls, even with the friend support, I still felt very much alone again. And I said I was confident in how I felt after the first one, because after he exposed what a narcissist he was, like, I felt like I dodged a bullet. Then the second time, 100% my choice, and I felt freedom in that. I felt so much guilt and so much shame because I truly loved this man, and he would have been a great father to my children. I know he would have. He's a great father to the children that he has, and he already wanted to move me to Hawaii, already wanted me to do all these things so that we could be together, even though he has a girlfriend and still not divorced from his wife. And at the time, like, that was love to me. I was so broken and so damaged. I didn't know what real love looked like. I couldn't even love myself enough to know what real love looked like. And I grew up in such a broken home that nobody ever showed me. Even my grandparents, they stayed together 50 plus years, but my grandpa used to cheat on my grandma all the time. And that was the church family that I was raised in. So I had no idea how to love myself, and in turn, what a real, true love relationship was even supposed to look like. And I know everybody has their problems and their struggles, but there are still some things that just aren't God's purpose and God's way for us. And I had no idea. So to me, every bit of attention, every bit of affection, anytime somebody showed me that kind of love, I wanted to grab it and hang on to it and keep it forever. So I meet, shortly after the second abortion is when I meet this man, Mike, through the jail system. And I'm not in a good place mentally. And a lot of it is because of this abortion. So I meet this man, I start using more heavily. I'm already in trouble with the law. I get arrested on a warrant. I get released. I start using. This man basically just inserted himself in his life. And I was at a place where I was so broken mentally and so beat down that I couldn't say no. I didn't have the backbone and the strength to set boundaries, to be firm. So I allowed him in my life. And I don't even think it was a solid year after my abortion, I got pregnant again. And I'm so angry at myself, so angry at him, because I knew it was intentional. And I'm also angry that it was out of rape. I wasn't sleeping with this man on a regular basis. I was waking up to him on top of me after a blackout on several occasions. And like I said, he convinced me that it wasn't real, that it wasn't how it happened, that I was just high on drugs, and that's not. He painted this whole picture of me being the one to initiate everything, but I just felt something was so wrong. There was just so much off about it, and I couldn't pinpoint it until I went to rehab and sobered up. I could look back and see all the red flags that I was missing before. So after telling my family, and after dealing with all the mental trauma that I'd just gone through from my previous abortion, I was very conflicted on what to do. And my mother, knowing the situation, wanted me to get an abortion or wanted me to give my child up for adoption. Either way, she did not think that I was fit to be a mother. She even told me several times throughout my pregnancy that I shouldn't do this again. It's not for me. I should give my child up for adoption. But I made the call to not have an abortion. And throughout my whole pregnancy, I regret that choice. I was so ashamed and felt so unworthy of motherhood. I knowingly used, because I didn't find out until about 3 months in. So I had a very small window to make the call on whether or not I was having an abortion. And so I decided to keep it. Went to rehab for 3 months, came home, and the whole time I was in rehab, they had me on Subutex, they had me on Boost Bar, they had me on, man, I can't even remember what all, Trazodone, whatever you can give a pregnant girl that's non-narcotic, they had me on it. So I come home, and not long after, I move in with my mother for the first time since I was probably 20. And we've never lived well together under the same roof. But she found out shortly after that she had cancer. At the time, we knew it was stage 4. She wouldn't really tell me the severity of it, but I could tell she didn't have long. So I do feel like God put me there for a reason. I'd been sober at that point. Once we found out she had cancer, I already didn't want my son. I didn't want him to be here. I was ashamed of how he was conceived. I was terrified I was going to resent him because my mother resent my brother because of who his dad was his whole life. And so I was so afraid that I was going to walk that out with my son. I was going to resent him his whole life because of how he was conceived and how he came to be. And I did not want that. But I used heroin, methamphetamines, pills, cocaine, alcohol, weed, cigarettes, the entire time I was pregnant, other than those 2.5 months I was in rehab. And even after he was born, I still didn't have it together. I still was using. My mom's still telling me I'm an unfit mother. It was a lot, so I didn't feel worthy. Plus, my mom's dying of cancer. And in the midst of all this, I wasn't reporting to probation like I should have been. So I have a warrant out before he's even born. I'm the only one taking care of my mother who's dying. I remember one day I literally had to peel her off the couch because she was dying from dehydration and refused to go on her own. So that was hard. That was very hard, being pregnant, overly emotional already because of my hormones, terrified of walking into motherhood from a child I didn't want because I didn't want him the whole pregnancy. and then dealing with my dying mother. So I didn't care that I was using. I didn't care what happened to my son. We go to the hospital the night he was born, and it was that's a whole story. So long story short, my labor was very quick. My water broke at 4:30. He was here at 5:07. We had to travel 20 minutes to the hospital. And even as I'm in labor, my mother is still telling me, don't do this again. You should get your tubes tied. You should not go through this. You are not in any position to be a mom. And she's the only person in my entire life that ever told me that. All my friends that were close to me, everybody who truly knew me, used to tell me I was going to be a great mom one day. So that hurt that my own mother was the only one who couldn't see that. He comes out, she's there. And I remember right after he was born, I didn't even know that they had set him on my chest. And I remember the minute Mom says, Lindsey, hold him. And it was the most beautiful moment of my life. The minute I held him and looked into his eyes, gravity shifted. I felt it in the room. The entire atmosphere shifted. And I knew that baby was the only thing in my life that mattered. So he's born. And like I said, I already had some legal trouble when he was born. 2.5 weeks old, I got ripped away from him and sent to prison for 6 months. My mother died while I was there. I'm still dealing with postpartum while I'm incarcerated. And being ripped away from your child, a child that I didn't even think I was ever gonna love, being ripped away from your child at 2.5 weeks old was the hardest thing I ever had to go through in my entire life. And then losing my mom right after. That was a hard stretch. I didn't know God at the time. Looking back, I can see every minute of his intercession. Had I not been in prison when my mom died, I'd probably be dead. I would be dead. I know that. I get out of jail, and the first thing I have to do when I come home is pack up my mother's entire home by myself and put it all in storage, which was hard. And it took a toll on me mentally. There was a struggle, a parental struggle between my brother, because my brother and his wife took care of him for me. I'm so thankful for them. But there was a struggle on who should have custody. The very last conversation I ever had with my mother was, I don't think you're fit to be a mother. You need to sign full custody over to your brother. And I never lost my son. I never lost custody of him. So she instilled that in him. And that took a really long time to overcome. And it wasn't even until I started walking with Jesus that relationship began to heal. And I've still struggled with some things. The guilt and the shame from an abortion, 2 abortions. The guilt I felt for not wanting my child the entire pregnancy was so hard. I know there have been a couple moments where God's really spoken to me through other people about forgiveness. But it was a process. And I'm still working through that process. Not so much for my abortions. Right before we filmed this, though, Krista, she prayed over me, and it was beautiful. She said, just a couple nights ago in session 1, she told me, or she was preaching about her child being in heaven and being grown, and that really spoke to me, because I have 2 beautiful babies up there. And I can't wait to meet one day that I get to spend eternity with. Because they're in God's hands. I'd been going to NA on and off for a long time. After I had my son, I started going to meetings in Bellefontaine, Ohio, where I met a particular man in the NA rooms that did life recovery meetings as well. And I don't know if you know about life recovery, but it is basically more of a recovery program based around Jesus and the Bible. And he invited me to a meeting. I always saw myself as very spiritual. And at this point, I'm chasing every bit of spirituality I can for healing. And I'm naive to the ways of the world and New Age beliefs, so I'm chasing everything worldly. And I ended up in a situation after naively practicing African voodoo witchcraft where I started to have, I'd always had night terrors, so I didn't connect the dots for a really long time, but the attacks at night became a lot stronger. It started out, I could feel something in my doorway. I kept having dreams where I could see something dark in my doorway, and I would wake up constantly screaming, "Get the F out," all the time. It was a regular thing for me. And then it came to a point where I could feel something watching me over top of my bed, and I would still scream the same thing, waking up. And then it moved right next to me as I'm sleeping. And throughout all of this, like, I didn't correlate what it was connected to. I just chalked it up to another bad dream. But I met this man in NA, and he was always talking about like Jesus and religion and all of these things. And I, being the spiritual person I was, is if you ever want to talk about spirituality, it's something I'm passionate about. I love conversations like this. And I feel like a lot of times believers and non-believers can sit down and have conversations like that, and they can become very heated very quickly. And I'm one of the people that's very open-minded, and like I genuinely enjoyed having conversations with him about it. And it became a regular thing. We started hanging out, and we would sit and have 3-4 hour conversations just about God and about spirituality, my beliefs versus his beliefs. And I started to question the reality of it. And the more I questioned the reality of it, and this took some time for me to piece together, but the stronger the attacks became at night. And it started to become, I would have like 6, 7, 8 attacks in one night where I would wake up, I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. All I could do was blink, and I'm trying to scream myself awake while my son is laying right next to me. It was terrifying. Doctors would call it sleep paralysis, but it was demonic possession. And it became stronger and stronger the closer I grew to God, and the more I started to question things. And I remember there was one particular moment where I had hung out with this man, we were talking, and I was fully convinced Jesus is real. It's all real. Everything's real. Witchcraft is real. It's all real. And that was the hardest I'd ever been attacked in my sleep. It was constant all night. I don't even remember how many attacks, but like I remember at one point I woke up, and I don't know exactly how long it was, but it felt like a good 10 minutes before I could move. And like I said, all I could do was blink, and like I just had this fear in my chest, and it was the most terrifying experience of my life. And I would tell people about it, and they would think I was crazy, but I told him about it, and he believed me. I woke up the next day though, after being fully convinced when I went to sleep. I woke up the very next morning, and it was like, he's wrong, I'm right, that's all a bunch of gibberish. I just completely switched. And I was able to discern the connection. I was like, wait, how did I go to sleep fully convinced that all of this is real, and wake up fully convinced that none of it is real? And then I was like, that's why I'm having these dreams and these attacks. And that's when it all started to come together, that these are demonic possessions. So I tell him about it, and like, this is where all my night terrors are coming from. And so, the very next night that I had an attack, I remember I woke up, and I just woke up screaming, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." And I haven't had a single night terror since. Once the veil's been lifted, you can't unsee it. And that's where I'm at with it. And I've found so much healing so much forgiveness, not just for others, but for myself. God's still peeling away my layers, but he's done a lot. I haven't even been walking with him a solid year yet. It'll be a year in September, I think. But just the amount of growth and the amount of healing I have gotten. I've been seeking healing, therapy, medication, doctors, yoga, meditation, chakras, everything new age, everything society tells you is great. Like, I've been seeking it everywhere. And this is the only place I have found true and lasting healing. And in that, my son, he'll be 3 here in just a few days. He reminds me to pray before bed. This holds his little hands. Every time he has a hard time, he says, "Help me, Jesus. Amen." And it's so beautiful that I get to show him that at such an early age, when it could have gone so different. And he could have grown up in so much trauma. And I struggle with the whole being a single mom and having to provide mom and dad for him. And I'm coming to the realization that he has God to be his father. And that's beautiful. That's more than I ever grew up with. And I feel so empowered as a mother to be able to shine love, light, and Jesus to my child. After just not very long ago, I was in such a darker direction, in such a dark place. Just a few short years ago, I tried to kill myself. And God kept me here for a reason. And he brought that beautiful baby boy into my life for a reason. He took something evil and used it for good. And had it not been for that beautiful baby boy, I wouldn't be here. He's my miracle baby. And it's so hard for me to even think back to the idea that I never wanted him. That is beautiful. I couldn't imagine my life without him. He makes me want to be the best version I can be. Not just for me, but for him. If I could go back, or to any woman walking in my shoes, in the position I was in the moment where I felt suicidal and that all was lost and that what's the point of going forward and moving on? And I wish somebody would have been there to tell me about Jesus. And I'm not 100% sure that I would have received it from just anybody, but God will find a way. All you have to do is plant the seed. And if you're looking for healing, if you're looking for life, surrender. Surrender control, because that was my thing, is I wanted to control everything in my life so hard. But the moment I gave Jesus the surrender of control, he has done nothing but bless me. I've found nothing but healing. And so anybody struggling with the same issues, I'm telling you, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and there's nothing else. I've tried, trust me. I've gone through every single outlet you can go through, every single new age belief of crystals and chakras and yoga and Buddhists and meditation and all of it. And I temporarily found relief and healing. But the only lasting truth I found is Jesus. And I know things seem dark and heavy and there is no way out. But there is. There's light at the end of the tunnel. You don't have to live like that forever. And that child may just be the child that changes your life and turns everything around. I know, because like I said, I grew him with so much hate and so much resentment already. But the minute I held him, it's an indescribable feeling, like gravity shifted. So don't feel like everything is lost and hopeless because of where you're at, because that child may just be the child that turns everything around for you. Everything. The minute you hold your own beautiful baby in your arms, like, there is no other feeling like it. It is undescribable. And I never even wanted to be a mom. Ever. I never thought I would be. I was content with dying alone with 6 dogs, and that was going to be my life, and I was happy with that. But life had other plans, and God has used it for the greater good, and it has been the most beautiful experience, and I'm just breaking the ice on it. He's only 3. I have so much more to look forward to.